Okay, so this is my Google Time presentation over Alexander the Great, and the question I'm going to be posing is, was Alexander the Great really that great? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to analyze the great events of his life, and I'm going to talk about how great they really were, or what flaws there were along his life, and we're going to analyze this and break down this question and find out if he was really that great. So to talk about Alexander's life, first you really have to talk about King Philip of Macedon, because King Philip's his father. There is some dispute as to whether Philip fathered Alexander or Zeus fathered Alexander, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Anyway, Philip had this grand ambition to conquer Greece, but to do that, first he has to conquer the Greek city-states of Athens and Thebes. Now keep in mind, Greece isn't a nation at this point, but it's just a bunch of city-states like these. So while Athens and Thebes aren't going to be pushovers, King Philip of Macedon at this point does arguably have the best army in the world. That's because he's developed an infantry unit called the Phalanx. The Phalanx is an improvement over the traditional Greek hoplite formation because the Phalanx features lighter armor, 18 to 20 foot long pikes, and they travel very close together. So not only do they have an outstanding range, but they're very fast and they're very hard to beat. So this showdown is going to occur in central Greece in a place called Corinthia. What Philip has done for this battle is he's divided his army into two pieces, his own half and Alexander's companion cavalry. So what Philip does at first is he advances on the Athenians, and then they meet him. And eventually Philip gives the call to retreat, and as Philip's army starts backing up, the Athenians follow him. But the Thebans are more disciplined, and they stay put. But it's a mistake, because it lets Alexander punch through and encircle the Thebans. And as this happens, the Thebans are cut off, and Philip starts advancing on the Athenians, and the Athenians are beaten, and Philip and Alexander end up winning the battle. This battle is such a big deal because it proves Alexander's military capacity. He's only 18 at the time, and he's already proved himself as a very capable general. It's also a big deal because Greece now belongs to Philip. So the battle at Corinthia could have been an excellent start to a great father-son Macedonian dynasty. But at the time, Philip had married another woman that wasn't Alexander's mother, and they gave birth to a child that was going to be the heir to the throne since he was pure Macedonian and Alexander was half Greek. And so mysteriously, Philip is assassinated by one of his generals, and Philip dies. But since Philip's son is too young to take the crown right now, it's not passed over to his son, and instead it's passed over to Alexander, and Alexander becomes the king of Macedonia, and Philip's dead. The Persians and the Macedonians have had a big beef for a while, so Alexander's next goal is to conquer the Persians and take over Asia. So this is when the story of Alexander begins to not make as much sense. So in the first battle between Alexander and the Persians, it's at the Granicus River, and King Darius of the Persian army doesn't go himself. He just sends one of his generals because he doesn't view Alexander as much of a threat, which is a mistake. Anyway, what Alexander is going to do for this battle is he's just going to try to cross over this Granicus River, go up a hill, and attack the Persians. Now, if you're like me, you're thinking, that's stupid. And it was. And there's no apparent reason that Alexander should have won this battle. They were massively outnumbered by the Persians, and it really shouldn't have resulted in a victory for Alexander. But it did, somehow, and it earned the trust of his soldiers, and they earned their first victory against the Persians. So the next tale of Alexander's greatness takes place in a place called Gordium. Gordium just surrenders to the Macedonians right away. They don't put up a fight. But anyway, in Gordium, there's this knot, and it's an endless knot because nobody can see the ends of it, and it basically looks exactly like the way I drew it. And it's rumored that whoever can untie this knot will be the king of all Asia. So Alexander, of course, being the egomaniac that he is, says, I'm going to untie this knot. And he goes up to the knot and he looks at it, and of course he can't see the ends because it's an endless knot. And he says it doesn't matter how this knot is untied, so he just pulls out his sword and he cuts the knot, and then he finds the ends and unties it. And some people are like, oh my gosh, he untied the knot, and then of course some people like me, I'm like, wait a minute, that's cheating. Anyway, so that night there's a giant thunderstorm, and Alexander takes that as the gods are pleased, and now he's even greater than he thought he was before. So I'm going to have a brief intermission in the story right here. Basically, Alexander was a huge egomaniac. He founded more than 30 cities named Alexandria. Yeah, you think he would be more creative, right? Anyway, and basically he untied this knot, and this oracle told him he was going to conquer Asia, and I mentioned before that there was some rumor that he wasn't the son of Philip, but he was the son of Zeus. And Alexander, at some point, goes to a temple where he asks these priests who can talk to the gods if he's the son of Zeus. And they tell him, yeah, he's the son of Zeus. And Alexander's like, awesome, I'm badass, because I untied the knot that said I was going to conquer Asia, and I'm the son of the king of the gods. But unfortunately, no one's around to witness Alexander being told this, so I'll take his word for it. So as Alexander continues his conquest of Asia, he's going to travel around the coastline, and he beats the Persians a few more times, and he has to take down their navy. And a huge Persian naval center is the city of Tyre, and it's off the coast. So if this is Asia, this is the island of Tyre, and there's giant walls around the city. And basically Alexander can't move on without conquering the city. So what he does is he builds a giant mole, which this is really ridiculous because to build this mole, it's like a bridge, but there's no suspension bridges. It's 300 BC, so it's basically just a pile of crap on the bottom of the ocean, rocks and trees and stuff to build a land bridge to this city. And of course, I'm over here thinking that's ridiculous. Why don't the little Tyrian navy ships just kill them while they're building the thing? And they do. They get pretty close to Tyre, and the first one's destroyed because the Tyrians are like, you're done. So he builds a second one, and for some reason the Tyrians don't attack this one as much, and Alexander builds a siege tower on the end of the thing and starts to siege Tyre, and he also has a navy come out too, and eventually the city's taken, and that's a huge turning point in the war, even though that was totally ridiculous, and I don't know how that happened. Anyway, long story short, I'm running out of time. Alexander ends up conquering Persia, and he becomes king of Asia, and he defeats the Persian king Darius, and despite many protests from his troops, he's going to continue his empire on to India. So Alexander continues his conquest of India until he gets to the city-state of Mali. Now, this isn't to be confused with the Malian Empire of Africa, that's much later. Anyway, Mali is another walled city, and how the Macedonians get in is they just walk up to the city with ladders to get over the walls. Now, the story goes that Alexander was getting impatient with his troops getting over the walls, so he just goes over himself, and he jumps into Mali, and he's fighting the Malians. Now, I'm over here thinking, that's ridiculous, Alexander, you're an idiot, why would you do that? But it's all good, because he's joined by three guys, count them, 3 other Macedonian troops, and they start fighting together. And then the ladder breaks or something dumb, and then they can't climb anymore. So while this is happening, Alexander takes an arrow to the chest, and he gets one of his lungs punctured. And this is really the downward point for Alexander. So somehow, miraculously, Alexander survives his fatal wound, and it's a couple years later when he's on his deathbed, and he dies of some kind of illness. We think it's malaria, but we're not sure. Anyway, Alexander never picked an heir, and at this point his army, or his empire, is divided up amongst his generals, and it falls shortly after that. Alright guys, so I've talked enough. I think it's finally time I answer the question, was Alexander the Great really so great? Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go with no, he wasn't. Alexander did a lot of great things. He did conquer Asia, but you have to admit he did some pretty crappy things as well. We think he might have killed his dad. He had some stupid battle plans like charging the Granicus River, and we don't even know if he did it on the first time. Some historians think he tried it a couple times before he succeeded. His military conquest was brought from his dad. A lot of it, his dad was the one that developed the phalanx. He was a huge egomaniac. He named all of his cities after himself. He was cruel to his soldiers, and they didn't want to go all the way to India because by that time they had been on the march for 7 years and they all wanted to go home. He did untie the knot, but he cheated with the knot. And he said he was a god, but nobody was there to witness the gods telling him that he was a god. So, honestly, if you look at all the things he did bad, and you look at all the things he did, not all the things that he did make total sense. Many people consider Alexander to be the greatest military leader of all time, and I agree that he was a great military leader, but I don't think he was a great person. He was a jerk and an egomaniac, and he wasn't even that great of a military leader, so I'm going to have to say that Alexander the Great was not that great. Thanks for watching. Best wishes, Colton James.